Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Worcester Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Naff. It's been a while since we've put out a podcast episode, and that's mainly due to the COVID pandemic. We hope everyone is embracing the pandemic and getting through that okay. We at K&S obviously have had a lot of discussions with our clients on how to properly navigate that in whatever real estate class they are in, and we hopefully we'll get through this soon, but we're going to have a really great discussion today on what that means for our business and how we can best move forward from there. So I'm very fortunate today to be joined by two titans in the real estate industry. The first is Phil DeSimone, the Senior Vice President of K&S Advisors. And I also have Ted Finnerty of Leggat McCall, who is a world-class property management group. So gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the Worcester Real Estate Podcast. And Ted, I guess I want to start with you. I'd be interested to hear what Leggat McCall is, what you all do, what the industry is all about.
Sure. It's great to be here and love being in the K&A offices and seeing such smiles amidst what otherwise is a tough time. At Leggat McCall, we are a 60-person firm that serves the greater Boston into Worcester to northeast area. We range from a group of 60 people that has 20% in the principal side of the business, which is in our investing, financing side. The other 80% is in development management, so that could be from advisory to commercial interior project management to complex development projects that might span 5, 6, 10 years. It's, as we mentioned in conversations leading up to this today, there's an abundance of overlap from firms like ours and
Sure.
firms like yours and how to help support each other's types of clients through a life cycle of a project and finding the right space and thinking how to occupy in that space and ultimately performing the work to get into that space. So we love working with you and love the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm curious to hear what the breakdown is as a percentage of what's the proportion of your clients that are office tenants? What's the proportion of, say, life sciences or warehouse? How does that all break down?
Sure. From a sector basis and a broad stroke perspective, we have a strong multifamily residential side of the business.
Gotcha.
We have a strong healthcare side of the business that does work in medical office buildings as well as ambulatory centers. We have a strong corporate and corporate interior business that might serve the legal industry or biotech to healthcare tech to advertising. From a life science lab perspective, that's another large section of our business, and as well as institutional academic. From a segments perspective, we really continue to spread the gamut, whether it's on a purely advisory perspective and a higher level, as well as development and complex and large scale long-term project to fast pace, really need to get moving, get in there. And in this pandemic, what we found is a lot of clients want to understand how they can use their existing space and get people back into their space. So we found there's a lot of support that's needed in conversations around how to go back to work amidst this COVID pandemic.
I'm real curious to pick your brain on how companies, how tenants can best navigate returning back to the workplace in the middle of the pandemic, because unfortunately we're not quite out of this yet. Before we get to that, Phil, I know you and Ted go back quite a ways throughout a variety of capacities, but I'd be interested to hear in your career as a broker, what's been your approach to project management? How can you best use folks like Ted and his team for your clients, to help your clients?
First of all, thanks for having us today, and I'm super happy to be at Kelleher Sadowsky. As you know, I joined just a few weeks ago, and it's been a tremendous experience already, and we're Andrew Sherman and I are really happy to be here.
Lucky to have you.
Yeah, thank you. And so I've known Ted for several years. When I was at my previous firm, we worked together, and then he went and worked for Leggat McCall Properties. And having a project manager is like having a right-hand man all the time, right next to you. So I can't stress enough to my clients that they should have a project manager in early and to help understand and help shape the vision of what they want for space, what they want for an environment, where they want to be. All those things, a project manager really helps them understand. Everywhere from the sort of visioning session to the move-in, and there's a lot that goes into that. So, some of our clients will have a project manager join sort of halfway in. Sometimes that's maybe a little bit too late, because what they've helped us do is, again, help define the objectives, help understand what the schedule would be, help understand what the budget is, and so oftentimes help understand, what the base building is, what the landlord's delivering to them. Where does their work stop and the tenants start, right? Oftentimes, as you know, there's a tenant improvement allowance. And so what does that mean? What can fit into that tenant improvement allowance, and the amount of money that's above that the tenant pays for, how does that all work? So we had a lunch and learn here today, and Ted had a great slide, which he should probably describe. And I really like it, because when they get in early, it reduces the time of the project and reduces the cost significantly. Right. So we enjoy working with project managers, and have worked with Ted in the past. So
when you're discussing with clients the potential value Ted and his team can bring to the table, how do you go about pitching that, and what's sort of been the best way to convince clients that there is a huge potential for them to take his team on?
I guess we try not to convince them, but try to help them understand where all the pitfalls are, and all the issues around a potential move, a relocation. What does that really involve, and who at their company is going to be spearheading that?
Right.
And what is the team that they have? Oftentimes they may have a team that has done this 20 times. Most of the time, someone's doing it that has never done it before, right? But they're assigned to it. And so you look at all the facets of a relocation, from, again, the vision to the move-in, and help them understand those things that they need to start thinking about now. And that resonates, and they start to say, okay, I'm not sure I have those capabilities, and I understand what the risks associated with those are. So we want to talk about how we use them. And oftentimes it's not the whole process. It could be part of the process, which I think Ted can talk about. But so it's a matter of helping them understand what the risk and reward is.
You mentioned pitfalls. I'd be curious to hear from both of you, given your breadth of experience. In the course of a project, are there common curveballs that that the client might not be thinking through? Are there surprising cost drivers that folks should probably think of before they get involved in these in-depth projects?
So because Ted has so much experience, he can give you 1 million of those. But I think probably the main 2 or 3, one is over-designing space.
Okay.
Right? So over-designing space and without the budget to pay for it is probably one. Schedule is probably another one, where, oftentimes clients will, start thinking about their relocation not in enough time. So you have to understand what that means to schedule. And then the third one is probably just the construction piece. Things always happen in a construction project. I don't care how much, due diligence you do. And what kind of construction drawings you have. Things are going to happen, and some of those can be pretty costly. So those are sort of generally the 3. But I'm sure Ted has some war stories that he can share with us.
So a way of thinking about it, to be slightly confusing even for maybe 10 seconds, is in our world, you're often thinking about the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns.
Right.
And so in the leasing environment, what's most helpful from the K&A perspective of how to think about project management is, how are you really thinking of answering some of the known unknown answers? and how are you preparing the client to be available or adjustable, or a different way of describing that is contingency, whether it's schedule and time or whether it's construction dollars and hard cash, so that you can still be prepared for those unknowns that will inevitably pop up on any schedule of a project. So it is, it's a very important aspect of the beginning part of an entire life cycle for a transaction, to understand how to support the client, support your brokerage team in understanding what those known unknowns could be.
Yep.
And your brokerage team will come to the table, and Phil will come to the table, and he knows a lot of them. He's been around a lot of them.
Sure.
You ultimately know a lot of them. And when you sit and think together as a team of what this particular client might have, then just the nature of that collaboration allows for the two of us or the three of us to come up with a few more.
Yeah.
And those few more, as you look at the specifics of a lease work letter or the specifics of a negotiation across a couple of buildings, those additional pieces of information ultimately help drive real dollars and real assistance to the
Right.
lease process. So yeah, are there millions?
Sure.
There, of course, there are millions. There are a lot of components that might come up, and the best part of that is, how do you help hold a hand? How do you help navigate? How do you help still maintain comfort through that process that your team, your real estate team and brokerage and project management understands and anticipates those things to mitigate that risk early,
Right.
and through the process that we do together.
And what I've found is that it's also specific to particular buildings, right? So each,
Sure.
we could say that generally these are the things, but until you select a building or buildings, you can't define some of those risks, right? It could be because the building is older. It could be the way the space was before the landlord's going to deliver it. It could be the contractor that they typically use. It could be, whatever it is. It could be the town, and the town has a long permitting process.
Yep.
Another one may.
Yep.
So it depends on the properties, and so together it makes a good team to help understand sort of what the market conditions are of this area that they're focused on, and then the particular nuances of a building and the process as well.
Yeah, and to jump on that,
Yeah.
team aspect is the purpose of a team often, right, is to provide different perspectives,
Of course.
right? And so by having a different perspective in the way the team, the real estate team working for a client is thinking about it, that augments the ultimate success of that deal. And I mean, that really is the helpful aspect of that collaboration.
So at the time of this recording, it's August of 2020. We are, give or take, 6 months into what was and might still be a global pandemic. And there's been a lot of debate in our industry of what that means for the market. And I know there's been a lot of discussions and questions about how to create a safe work environment. So Ted, I'd be interested to hear what you and the team are talking about in how to best provide recommendations and service to your clients, and how to create a safe working environment.
Thanks. So the most important thing is to, first, everybody wants to follow your CDC, your local municipality guidelines. The next component of that would be from a type of work, a type of office, whether it's for your staff or whether it's for your business. What's the impact of working from home that many people are versus working in an office environment? People are losing, whether it's collaboration,
Sure.
time together,
Yeah.
or it's introduction, or working with new people or business partners. If what we're finding, if clients can successfully work from home, they are choosing to continue to work from home. Many of which might work successfully, many of which have adapted all sorts of new technology and such that you hear about. What will be the leader, obviously a vaccine would be a game changer for many and how they're thinking about it. But there are certain applications, one such as a Buoy Health Back to Work app that helps from a classification and a symptom checking and algorithmic perspective of, can I get a pass to go to work today? And in that scenario, employer might have an office that can seat 60, and maybe based on a guideline, they can have 15 people in that office on that day. Well, even if I'm completely healthy, it might tell me, nope, you stay home today.
Interesting. Okay.
And scenarios like that, using technology through whether it's symptoms or how you get to work or other applications are what will help drive people in the in-between time.
Yep.
Sure, there's the face masks, there's evaluating the floor plan, there's thinking of where's the right intersection point that people are going to hit, and how do you mark that. There's a lot of work that you could do within an existing plan if a client or if a tenant actually feels the real need that they have to have more people in the office. What we're seeing in the lab space is that lab has never been able to leave, so they've figured out really early how to still have the correct PPE and still figure out on the shift to get people into those environments. We heard in many cases where public transportation had been a means to get to work, that some companies were actually hiring private bus companies to collect people to then bring them to the office. Because what you're hearing is that people feel very safe at home, and people actually feel genuinely pretty safe in the office. It's the in-between and getting from home to the office that's a bit of the challenge, and how do you navigate that period during this stretch. But there are an abundance of approaches or methods that one could use if their office environment needs to come back. And I think working with your team at Kelleher and Sadowsky, we'd figure that out quite efficiently.
I happen to agree. Phil, everyone flew again after 9/11. So I think eventually people will feel more comfortable, not just in the office, but on the way to the office. It might take a vaccine, it might take some other preventative measures. Where do you see the office market going? Do you have thoughts on where we could be headed, or other types of real estate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's sort of two phases to this. Maybe there's, first phase has an A, B, and a C. It's first re-entry into the space, right?
Yep.
So how do we re-enter? And right now it's a percentage of the workforce, so not a lot of people going in. But there's going to be that'll gradually increase. So I think companies are trying to figure out what's that re-entry look like between now and then. And then once, call it, post-vaccine, what does the workspace look like?
Right.
And what does that do to real estate, right? What does that do to space? And so I think what's going to happen is, and I'm an optimist, that it's going to create this new flexibility for employees. They've figured out how to work from home.
Yep.
They've already been working from an office setting. And now they're going to have this flexibility about going into the office not at the same time every day, right? So the commute will be different. They won't go in there every single day. And so I think having flexibility is going to actually boost morale. It's going to boost productivity because people feel like they have more, they are able to take control of their own, destiny every single day, as opposed to before where, I did the same thing. I'd wake up at 5:30, race to the office to beat the traffic, go work out, and go to my desk, right?
Right.
And so I don't have to do that anymore. And so there's sort of this relief. So I think what's that going to do to space? I'm not necessarily sure, but space is going to look very different. Mm-hmm. And my sense is it's going to be a lot of unassigned seating. It's going to be cleaned regularly, and you'll go in and out when you need to. And then really good collaboration space and meeting space, so that when you have to have meetings, it's going to be very effective. There's going to be really good technology associated with it too, so people can beam in. And so does that mean it's more space or less space? I don't think anyone knows that quite yet. But I think the way we're going to work is going to be very different. But I also see right now a lot of my clients are saying that a majority of the people want to stay home. But I think it's because we're still in this pandemic kind of, place. And they haven't figured out the daycare. There's other things that are going on in their life. Of
course.
So it's just easier to say, I'm just going to stay home. Public transportation is another issue. So I'm hoping that, it doesn't take as long as some people are saying, but I think it's going to drag on for a while, and it's going to put space back on the market in the short term for sure.
Well, the interesting thing on conversations around density, right? It's always a pendulum in cubes. In the 80s, it was high cubes and then back down to low cubes, and then now it's kind of creeping back up, right? So in the pendulum of density is we were approaching essentially the densest office environments have been, and if people are going to maintain an office, they are going to require a higher rate so that they're able to actually have more people come back to an office to work. So it'll be an interesting, even if people are still working from home in that environment, that user which was contracting might ultimately have to maintain or grow. And so if you can run the scenario cards down each kind of spectrum, you can find yourself talking into a corner about every scenario about how it could work. And I think what we'll find is the way you can be adaptable, the way you can be quick, nimble, get into the nitty-gritty of what the client really needs, what the space really can do. That's where I think the real value is going to pan out.
I'll say one more thing about that.
Good? All right.
So, again, having been here for a couple weeks now, and having everyone in the office here, and we're maintaining social distance, and we're doing all the right things, and we've set up the space really well. The human interaction, the impromptu kind of meetings and collaboration we have here is fantastic. And I think a lot of companies are missing that right now, and so I love being back in the office. It's been really great. So I think that's what's going to happen. People are going to realize that it was okay at home, but now being in the office and all those relationships that they used to have, now they can.
I totally agree. I think our business depends on that, and I think a lot of companies are in a similar position. My dad worked for IBM. He worked from home for 15 years. He's since left the company, but IBM, who sort of was the innovator in the work from home idea, so they started about 10 years ago, 10 years ago, calling people back to some regional offices because not that people aren't productive when they work from home. Most people want to do a good job and work hard. It's more you miss out on that collaboration, company culture, synergy. That all, I think, really does get lost sometimes when everyone's at home. So I totally agree with you there, Phil. Just staying on the pandemic for just another moment here. We had an interesting conversation when we had our luncheon earlier today, and the idea of the global changing due to the pandemic, where companies, particularly in biomed or life science, may not want to rely on a supply chain that's global. They may want to have a supply chain that's more local. So what are we seeing in the Boston and in general Massachusetts market? Are firms starting to or thinking about bringing some of their manufacturing here? Where are they looking? What does that look like?
Yeah, from a big theme perspective, the supply chain constraints are very real. That's in as much in biomanufacturing of product and substance as it is in even construction materials.
Oh, sure.
And having things more regionally located. For instance, office walls or storefronts, as people call them. A lot of that frequently comes out of Canada and comes down, or maybe it comes from western parts of the country. And those types of companies are going to, they'll want to have something that's in a closer proximity, even Worcester or South Shore between Rhode Island or Mass. The concept of warehouse space is, you can read in the paper at any day what Amazon or any of the other big box stores are trying to change or adapt to. the kind of last minute mile approach is going to start hitting all the major segments for us. And that could be manufacturing, it could be warehousing, it could be production, it could be assembly. If you think of construction, if the pandemic or if the virus is going to linger in the market for a period of time longer than we think, the concept of having more prefabricated components come to a project site will become more real to have it continue with its work. So there's anywhere on the spectrum, there's a variation of what types of businesses will be looking for that type of return to the kind of local markets and your local geography.
The two asset classes that are doing particularly well right now, one is the warehouse distribution market and life science, right? So life science hasn't changed. People are still at work.
Oh, sure.
I think we're going to see more contract manufacturing and the biomanufacturing come closer to Cambridge and Boston, and be along 495 and in Worcester in a really big way. And then on the warehouse distribution side, that's doing extremely well. So what that means is we're going to see the adaptation or the renovation of properties going into something else, right? So it could be a retail center becomes more of a life science, or it could be maybe warehouse distribution as it wasn't that before. So I think we're going to see that a lot. We're going to see these readapt or renovations or revitalization of these properties into something else.
Yeah, because the utilities exist, right? And obviously, if you're going to add more manufacturing, I'm sure a power or utility of that sort might need to increase. But in an adaptation scenario, there's a frequent conversion concept of the malls that are the C malls or the B malls that have gone belly up in other parts of the country that get converted.
Yeah.
So
we've seen it here.
Yeah, using that as the model or as an example, right? Take that into a smaller scale at different times, and that will be a continued theme, I think, over the next set of years.
Certainly very interesting times. Gentlemen, I'd like to thank you for your time today. Phil, every time we speak, I learn something new. And Ted, you and your team coming to the office today was great. I certainly learned a lot from our conversation here and our luncheon earlier. I know the K&S team did as well. So I'd like to thank you both for your time today.
Chris, thank you so much.
Really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
So that concludes yet another episode of the Worcester Real Estate Podcast. This podcast is presented by Kelleher Sadowsky, the premier commercial brokerage firm in all of Central Massachusetts. Till next time, we'll see you then. Thanks so much.